Great. So thanks to everyone for joining my session about how to use the REST API as a DBA. Very short about me. My name is Julian Frey. I work as an Oracle database consultant at Edorex in Switzerland. You can reach to me via email or Twitter handle or over my blog or the company blog. I live here in the middle of Europe near to Bern. And besides that, I'm currently a member of the Oracle ACE program and one of the organizers of the Oracle Beer Bern. It's a local meetup, and currently, due to the current situation, it's only held virtual, and the next one will be on the 27th of October with a lot of tuning experts about the panel session for database tuning. But next, this presentation is about the REST API. First of all, I would like to start with what a representational state transfer is, because as a DBA, probably we are not that familiar with REST as developers are. The REST API or REST is a programming paradigm for distributed systems. It's used in all these microservices environments and in currently for cloud and for all this stuff. It's serverless, it's client server architecture with a stateless client server less architecture or API. For that, we need a client. Client could be web browser, could be curl, could be everything which is able to send HTTP requests. And we need a web server which is able to get these HTTP requests. We send an HTTP request as mentioned to the web server. The web server gets this request, could be a get request, a post request, a put request, delete, patch, head, options, connect, trace. There are many methods to call the web server. Depending on the API, what methods are supported or with which URL we are working. Then we do have some different methods for using. Get is probably the easiest one. We send a get request to the web server. The web server works with this request and sends the response back to the client. Normally, or the most distributed response type is JSON. Again, I think as DBAs, probably we are not that familiar with JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's a way to describe a format. It also could be CSV or anything else. The ORDS REST API is normally sending JSON requests back. JSON is quite easy to work with most of the tools or programming languages. We have elements, we have strings, we have integers, we have booleans, everything we need. That's almost the basic we have to know about REST and JSON. With this knowledge, we can start with the ORDS. ORDS stands for Oracle REST Data Services. It started in around 2011, and then it was called Oracle Application Express Listener, the release 1.1. And with one of the releases, in the two releases, I think 2.6, it was renamed from Application Express Listener to ORDS, Oracle REST Data Services. And then 3 years later, between these 3 years, there were some sub 2-point releases. Then in 2017, the development was getting faster, the version 3.0. There was in the end a 3.11, and then 2018 in January, I think, yes, the January was the release 17.4. And then 2019 again in January, it was 18.1. And now then in 2019, now it's getting interesting for us. In January, in April, we had 19.1. And in August, we had 19.2. With 19.2, Oracle provided the Oracle REST Data Service API for database API. With this database API, we were not only able to use this REST API as the developers do for getting the feedback of statements like a select statement or the content of a table or executing a PL SQL procedure. Oracle provided some basic database APIs for the DBAs. And then in 2019, in 2019 in December, I think 19.4, and now we got in August 22. There were some improvements in all these releases. Yes, sorry, there is a typo. It's not 19.2, it's 19.4, the second one. But with the 22, there were the extension to the service broker implementation. Service broker implementation is an open documentation way or an open standard for how to describe REST APIs. In 19.4, there was the extension for the SQL Developer Web and some performance improvements and some installation changes. And now, what is ORDS? As the name states, it's a REST API for Oracle databases, but it's not only for 19.4 database, for the 19.4 REST ORDS release. It's with the 20.2 ORDS release, you are able to handle all databases starting from 11 R2. One of the biggest advantages, I think, as a DBA, it's developed and supported by Oracle, which means if we have some problem, if we have an error or anything else, we are able to create service requests and handle it. If we do the development of such an API by ourselves, we are in charge of error handling and of everything else. With the SQL Developer Web, if you never have seen it, take a look. It's quite nice. It's getting close to the client installation of SQL Developer, but web-based. And there is an extension for auto-REST. That's almost everything for the normal REST API. But we are interested in the DBA part. DBA part, Oracle divides it in some categories. One is environment management, which means we are able to handle DBCA jobs. That means we can create the DBCA job. We can take a look at already executed jobs. We can take a look at the whole history of the DBCA jobs. As mentioned, we can create databases. We can delete them. And we can gather information about DBCA jobs. And we have the possibility to get information about installed Oracle homes. And the endpoint we use here is like this: ORDS, stable environment homes. With this command, with this URL, we are able to gather information about all the database homes installed on this server, which is quite nice. We don't have to log into the server via SSH and gather the information on a different way. We have some data dictionary information. We have some views we can take a look in via the REST API. Could be DBA tab columns, procedures, tab partitions, DB links, constraints, DBA objects, DBA tables, DBA synonyms, arguments, MU logs, and so on. All these DBA views can be gathered by an URL in this format. I'll show most of them afterwards in a demonstration. But as you can see, it's quite easy to get the information about the database via this URL. Further on, there is the fleet patching and provisioning, which means there is a API for the rapid home provisioning. Of course, it needs the rapid home provisioning installed. I've never used it until now, but could be interesting if someone is using RHP. Get to me, reach out to me. I'll quite interested in using it and never done it before. Then there's a general section. The general section is really includes a lot of different things. One part is data pump job management, which means we are able to create data pump jobs, to get the information about executed data pump jobs, delete jobs, and so on. We are able to gather information about the database itself, about options, parameters, and so on. We are able to get tablespace information. We are able to get DBA segment information. There are a lot of views we can take a look in. This is an example of how to gather the tablespace information, which also is quite easy and can be used in different automation tools. One part which can be probably used in user environments where Enterprise Manager is probably not in use or other monitoring tools are in place. It's the monitoring section. We can get the alerts of the database. It's almost the alert log we can gather. We can get information about database logs, some session weights. There are some more information we can gather in this part, in this section. And as an example here, we have the monitoring part for alerts. If we want to integrate it in a third-party tool or whatever, it's quite easy, I think. Then for DBAs, one interesting part could be, or also for the developers, is the statistics monitoring part, the performance monitoring part, sorry. We can get information about statistics. We can get information about SQL statements, about ASH. All the active session history information is possible. And for active session history, it looks like this with the performance active session history. Quite easy, quite handy, I think. And the last part, I think, a quite nice way for integration is the PDB lifecycle management. We are able to start and stop PDBs. We can clone PDBs, we can drop PDBs, we can plug and unplug a PDB. We can get information about all the PDBs in a CDB. And for getting all the information about PDBs in the CDB is like database and PDBs. That's the one I used most. Probably have seen some information or you're missing anything here. Or if you take a look at the PDB lifecycle management, you think, yeah, but in our environment, we have one CDB for integration tests or whatever. And we want to have a clone of a production database in this CDB, but we have 100 different production databases and we need a database link first for create PDB from source or whatever. There is one way of doing it. We can use other tools, Shell, Python script, Ansible, Terraform, but that's probably not the way or the part of this presentation. I think the way we would use is use the REST API with PL SQL packages like the developers used hopefully for years. We can use the REST API with PL SQL packages, and as an example, create the PL SQL procedure, which creates us the DB link to the production database, then clones the production database, probably with no data or some transformation of data afterwards, or some whatever we need in our development stage, and then delete the database link. Then we probably don't use the DBA part of the ORDS API, but we are able to satisfy the requirements we have in probably our CI/CD pipelines with the ORDS, with one identified and easy to handle API. Why do we need ORDS as DBAs? I think the most important part is automation. Automation is key as DBAs. We can profit from every automation in different ways. One of the key takeaways of automation is quality. We are able to provide constant quality and assure that every installation looks the same. Further, it's easier to maintain multiple systems if they follow the same guidelines, installation and configuration guidelines, especially if there are new team members, or in my case, if I'm new at the customer, I'm quite happy if all the databases and servers are similar or look like the same. Beside the quality of one of the biggest advantages of automation is security. It's easy to forget one step in an installation if we install manually, which leads to security holes, and probably get blamed by our security guys. If we automate, again, every system looks the same. Besides that, every system looks the same. It's also easier to maintain security and update systems if they look the same. In case of ORDS, we do have an additional security advantage. The API is managed and supported by Oracle, as mentioned already. It means we are able to, we are the customers, and we are able to get support. And if there is a security hole in the ORDS API, the chances that somewhere in the world anyone is finding this security hole is quite big, because a lot of people are using it. And it's probably easier to get a fix by Oracle than develop it by ourselves, especially if we are not developers, as I'm not. Another important point is currently the way the DBA job develops. The DBA who is waiting for a ticket to pop up, or for a task for a new database which provides the work for the next 1 or 2 weeks, is hopefully near to not existing anymore. The DBA is already, or will hopefully be, part of a DevOps environment, in which speed is one key point. I'm talking about the execution speed of, I'm not talking about the execution speed of an SQL statement. I mean the speed of providing pluggable databases or providing a copy of a production database. As an example, one of my customers is Swiss government, and they're quite far with all the automation, which means if developers check in or commit with a special tag to their Git repository, the integration stage will be created. That means a new duplication of the production database starts, and then the application gets deployed to the application servers, and database tasks will be executed, probably new tables, indexes, and so on. This is quite fast. They are currently almost at the execution time of all the different steps. If we would do this in a manual way, like waiting for the ticket and execute the ticket, it would probably not satisfy their needs in fully automated way for providing new versions of the database. And ORDS is one way or one tool we are using there for all the automation, and helps us here a lot because there's a public documentation for ORDS and not the DBAs documenting everything. How does it look like in the architectural way? We have a client, as mentioned, could anything which is able to send HTTPS calls, browser, curl, whatever. Then we need a web server. If we install ORDS, we get this standalone mode. The standalone mode configures the chatty web server, but we are able to use Tomcat equals or newer than version 8.5. We also are able to use WebLogic server, of course, and here we need a version 12.2.1.3 or newer. Then we need a database server or a database with or a rapid home provisioning server. And the database environment service enabled for ORDS. User with the system administrator role, the database newer or equals 11.2. DBA privileges for the installation and the table space for the metadata. As before mentioned with the system administrator, we have some security parts here. One part is if we want to create a DBCA job, we are not able to use a database user, of course, because the database is not already existing. That means we need an ORDS user. In my examples, I use afterwards the ORDS user, and I'll show how to create that. We use the system administrator and SQL administrator roles for this user. With these roles, we are able to perform these DBA tasks and everything I will show. But we are also able and use a common user for all PDBs. We need a common user for starting and stopping PDBs and cloning PDBs, of course. And for the PDB management and monitoring and alerting and so on, we need a PDB user. We can enable this user with this package ORDS admin and enable schema. How does it look if we probably to get an overview and what are we doing? This is how we execute, and in this specific example, I'm creating a database with curl. I send a post request. I need at least two header information. One is the content type application JSON, that the database is aware that JSON is coming. And I think, as I've read the Twitter feed by Chris Rice, also for the answer of the ORDS API. The second is we need an authorization. In this case, it's a basic authentication with username password as base64 encoded. Then, of course, the URL. In this case, it's the URL for environment for DB homes. The name of the database home, in my case, the database home is called RDBMS19. That's the name you use if you go by DBCA, by OE, Oracle User Universal Installer and define the name, then databases. I need a body because it's a post request. I'm able to provide a body. With data part, in this case, the DBCA parameters like global database name, the template I use. This template is the normal DBCA template, general purpose, system password, syspassword, and where the response file lies. In this case, /temp/dbca, or wherever we have our response files. With this curl command, I'm able to create the database. How do we install it? very short before we start with the demo. Get the latest version of the ORDS, unzip the zip file, and start it with java-jar ords.war install, and we are able to provide silent and parameter file and so some other parameters. I start with the demo. So I hope everyone can see my screen. I have my database server with one database and the listener. The database has one PDB, which is called PDB1. I already have the zip file, the most current zip file. Then I have to create, of course, a directory for the binaries. I configure the ORDS in the product folder. And then, of course, I need a directory for the configuration files. I change into this directory. As mentioned, unzip the file. Then, as before mentioned, I start with the installation. Sorry for that, I missed that point in my preparation, but that's quite fast. I'm using here an Oracle Linux server and a 19.5 database. Sorry for that, missed that during the preparation of my VM. So I've already extracted everything. And now again, start with the install. I need the location where I want to put my configuration. Then, because I have the database installed, and I'll install ORDS directly in the CDB and the PDB. My database is called FreeDB, has a service FreeDB. I have to enter the password for the public user. The public user is used for proxy login for ORDS. Now I need an administrator who is able to install in every PDB. Because I use the CDB here, I need sys, and I'll get asked for the password confirmation, and if I type it correctly, yes, then I get an overview. I have the root CDB, PDB seed. In the PDB seed, I'm not able to install ORDS because it's read only. Further on, then I have the PDB1. which will be installed with 22. Then I need a table space. In my case, I use sysax. I don't want to migrate the PL SQL gateway in this case. Now I get asked what I want to install. I could install SQL Developer Web, which enables all the features like the REST enabled SQL database API and both. I only need the REST enabled SQL API and the database API. Will take some seconds, but not more. It's quite fast. Probably Zoom is probably consuming a lot of my resources of my notebook. I'm not sure, but it will not take that long. But as you have seen, it would be quite easy to install the SQL Developer Web just with these commands. Oracle will create the proxy user as mentioned before, schemas, grant some privileges and some database objects, write some log files for future usage. Now I will configure the ORDS for standalone mode as mentioned before. Oracle will configure a Jetty web server. I like security, therefore I use HTTPS. Port 8443 is fine. My server is called dbhost1. I use, or Oracle should create a self-signed certificate, or else I could have provided a path for my certificate. As mentioned before, Jetty is running up and running. Now we should be able to use the ORDS API for database objects and so on. But for the DBA API, we need something more. As mentioned before, we need a CDB common user. We grant sysdba to all containers. And for demonstration purposes, I connect to my PDB and grant for the PDB admin user or I enable the PDB admin user for ORDS. Now we have to configure ORDS to give the credentials of this CDB admin user. We create a CDB admin properties file with the username and the password. We could have set it with 2 steps with set property, but I use with set properties and then I have to give a properties file, of course. Now I'm able to delete this again. I don't use it anymore. And as mentioned before, I need a user with SQL administrator and SQL system administrator privileges. That's also, this user is also created with this java-jar ords.war user admin. I got asked for a password, of course. Now we have to enable the database API. So let's check if everything is working. With java-jar ords.war standalone, I'll start the Jetty web server again. Now let's verify everything is working as it should. as mentioned before, I could use the curl command. This command should provide me all installed database homes. And yes, as mentioned, or you have seen in the presentation, I have this database home. Great. I'm probably not a fan of executing it in a user session. Therefore, I'll create a service for systemd. That's just, I'll provide the information afterwards with all the service creation. It's really an easy service. I'll enable the service. I'll start. Oh. Again, start. Okay, I have somewhere an error in my, sorry for that. I'll correct the service file. I don't know where the error is currently, but doesn't matter for my demonstration because so now again I started standalone mode. Because curl is probably not the tool we want to use. There are many Firefox plugins or other plugins, or I use Insomnia. Insomnia is an API development tool. I've already shown before the homes. You see here the get command. I have here my basic authentication. I don't use a body. That's everything I do. I send it and get the same information I got before. But how would it look like if I would create a database? I have again, now it's a post with this URL, and I use this RDBM as home as used before. I use this response file here and I send it. I don't get a response. I have the header with a location, a link location. I open this link, as mentioned before, RDBMS, DBCA jobs, and then an ID of this job. It's a GET request, and I now get the DBCA output, like 10% completed, and now currently DBCA is copying database files. I think quite an easy way for creating a database. But I mentioned before, we are also able to take a look at PDB statuses. I want to see how many databases I have in this CDB, or which database, which PDBs with the database PDBs. Now I get the information of PDB seed. and PDB1 and some further information. I'm also able to close one PDB. Closing is a post request. In this case, I need the state close, a modify option immediate, and this URL. Everything is documented by Oracle. I'll provide the link for the documentation and everything in the slides. As soon as I've sent this command, I get the response pluggable database altered. If I want to open the pluggable database, the same, but with state open. And again, pluggable database altered. I think it's a quite easy way for handling databases. If I want to create pluggable database, it's almost similar. Mentioned before, if I want to use monitoring, I'm able to use monitoring with database monitoring alerts. And I get all the information about the alerts and so on. Success, that's probably the creation of all the database. If I want to see table spaces, I have an here. That shouldn't look like. If you have an error in your URL, you get the 404 or whatever. Now I get all the table spaces for my PDB. And I think, and what I really like about the ORDS database API, if I would have to create everything by myself and provide or develop an API like this, it would be quite hard, I think. So now I think we have some time for some questions, or do we have time for questions? I'm not sure. Or are there any questions?
For the moment, there are no questions.
Okay.
But we have some time, so 5 minutes more, it's okay.
Okay.
It's safe.
If you have any question, please let me know. Any security that we need to take care of place? Yes, of course, I would really suggest to not use HTTP, use HTTPS. If you use it afterwards in a bigger environment, you're able to use OAuth 2. That's documented. And of course, you're able to use then WebLogic authentication and so on. But from the other parts, you're using sysdba. That one means you're using the highest privileged user. Take care who is using or who is able to use this API, of course. But normally, if you have your database network or your VLAN configuration, you have probably VLAN for administration or anything else, and probably you should only expose it on this network. Has this answered any further question? What are limitations of using REST API? One of the limitations I think is currently for creating PDBs. As an example, you're not able to use all options. There are some limitations. Oracle is really extending the possibilities you can execute with the ORDS, but take a look at the documentation to see if all your requirements are fulfilled with the current version, and if the requirements you need are not provided by Oracle, you always have the possibility to use the SQL way of creating your REST endpoint and then using the SQL procedure with the REST endpoint. Yes, there is also what is it called in Enterprise Manager? Database cloud service or something similar, a REST API via Enterprise Manager. What's the difference and the advantages of for DBAs? I think it's depending on the environment and probably if you have licensed the packages, the features in the Enterprise Manager, because as far as I know, you need the provisioning pack for using the REST API in the Enterprise Manager, or else you have to use EMCLI, which probably is more coding than using the ORDS. ORDS is free of license for every database, therefore it's quite easier. And as you have seen, it's not a huge implementation. It's quite easy for installing. I don't think it's a lot more. There is a question for a while. This is fondly used by application developers. Do you think it puts more load on the network? I don't think so, because we are only sending REST requests, small HTTP requests with small bodies. I think the footprint is smaller than if we connect via SSH and so on, but that shouldn't be a problem, I think, the network traffic. Anything else? Any further question?
I'm not seeing anything else. Someone raised his hand if he wants to ask something, just to write in chat or in Q&A, or maybe he raised by mistake. Sometimes happen. Yeah, probably yes.
Okay.
So nothing else. Thank you so much, Julian.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
hosting.
everyone, for being with us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where part of the world you are. Join the next session. It will be also interesting. It's Neil with stats. And have a good one. Thanks again, Julian.
Thank you very much for having me, and have a great day.